Meeting of the Ames City Council for December 19th to order. Welcome, everybody. The first item I'd like to take up is a motion to reconsider decision made on December 17th, 2019 regarding downtown parking. So I would entertain, there's discussion. I mentioned this, I made a mention of this on under council comments at the end of our meeting on the 17th. And I would, I'm interested in if there's a motion to reconsider that.
I'd move to reconsider the vote regarding the alternative 1A that we adopted.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion?
So the purpose of this will be to put it on a future ballot, I'm sorry, about a future agenda?
No.
Or we're going to do it tonight?
Actually, the if this motion passes, I would ask for a motion since it's on the agenda to continue the hang tag system because that does sunset at the end of this year. And also consider, or I'd like to recommend that we just maintain status quo on the parking behind in all the parking lots, but then also consider the 3-hour parking on streets as was recommended by the consultant.
Okay.
And give that a year or two, or at least a year to monitor that before, and then we can also go back and look at the study as we need to during the year.
Just to be sure, you're talking, Damien, correct me, you're talking about the Main Street meters going to
Thank you.
3, right? So all meters, should they say all meters 3?
The suggestion was all meters to be 3-hour limits.
Okay, you want to say that?
Downtown.
Yes. In the downtown.
Right.
In downtown, not in campus town, or on other places.
Right.
Correct. None of the recommendations had anything
Oh,
to do
no,
with
we have
campus.
it's downtown parking study. Okay,
So are any of the meters longer than 3 hours now, even in the periphery?
They're 2 and 4.
Okay.
Pretty much, I think just the Main Street meters are 2, and then all the other side streets are 4. So we're trying to make those consistent. But what I'm hearing is then that the lots, nothing regulatory or time limit wise would change in the lots. So really, it's the only on-street time limit. It's the only thing that's changing because no rates were being touched anyway.
Mm-hmm.
all right, those in favor, motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstaining? Motion carried. All right, is there a motion to continue the hang tag system and maintain status quo and go with 3-hour limit on the on-street meters?
So moved.
Second.
All right, any discussion?
So, and we had some feedback from the Main Street group. Is what we're doing tonight consistent with what they were hoping to see happen?
Better than what we went with.
That
It
wasn't the
wasn't the
recommendation.
first choice, but
It's
it's,
now preferable to the action you took.
Their desire is to maintain status quo in lieu of what was voted on Tuesday night. And I think that we can probably re-enter a conversation sometime next year or later next year. I think the point is, if we can get this corrected tonight, and then we have other things to focus on, and then we can always go back and revisit the parking.
Okay.
So,
My only concern is the spots out on the periphery, that we're decreasing from 4 to 3 with this.
Yeah.
Is that, if it's not a concern,
I
but
thought
we're
we
saying maintaining the status quo, except out of the periphery,
Well,
we're taking it down an hour.
well, the periphery, I mean, the far periphery is still at 10 hours. Because we didn't change the lots. Like
the
lot
meters in the
Q.
parking
Okay,
lots.
all right, then I'm all right.
No, it's
It's
just
just the
on street.
on-street.
Okay, I was thinking it was those two.
And John, would this address the concern you raised last night?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstaining? Motion carried. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, we'll turn it over to Kelly and Marty. And by the way, we look forward to hearing what you have to say tonight.
All right. So we are too. So we gave you a pretty extensive slide set to try and give you as much information up front, so you would have a little bit more exposure than last time. We also have some additional staff here tonight that was involved in the works. We have Damian Pregitzer, traffic engineer, and we have Joe Spradling from HDR. Their firm did did the work with the water and sewer modeling. They also, different group, did the modeling for traffic. So we have the people here that were involved in all the assumptions and all the background on land use with RDG as well. So we're going to walk through. Your first task you gave us was to load 15,000 people directionally around the city. That was the first task. And then as we did that, we suggested you would probably be interested in looking at different components of each of those areas. And we broke that into tiers. Marty's going to go through how that works with breaking down each of these areas. One thing that we're not looking for action tonight. I don't know, Mayor, did you have a chance to think about meeting schedules?
Yes, and regarding the discussion this afternoon is when do we invite public comment? And so far we have 4 of the 6 council members. I know Councilman Martin is going to be out of town. That was already a planned thing. So Amber's going to be checking her schedule, but I think we're going to plan on having this January 7th. We will have that meeting will be dedicated just to public input. So, and then it will be also somewhat informal, so council can ask the people giving input questions. Lori mentioned that there's an ACVB annual event that night that ends at 6:30, so we'll probably end up starting at 6:45 or 7 o'clock versus 6 o'clock, so people can attend that event. And we're probably going to plan for at least 2 hours.
John, are we going to be intentional about who we're going to invite to that specifically?
Absolutely.
So as we think through this, I just want to make sure that we also consider the respective school boards that are impacted by this discussion, as well as we formally invite Story County. Appreciate Morris attending tonight. Make sure that they're invited, as well as Boone County, since they're impacted as well.
Good point. Very good point. We'll just work with, I'm sure, staff, and we'll give that serious consideration, how we get that message out. And I know that there's other vehicles through emails as well.
So our understanding tonight is we're going to field a lot of questions from the group, give you as much as we can tonight. You're going to look for public input on this information, basically on January 7th, and then you will at a later date give direction to the team about selecting or moving towards a preferred land use to create a draft. That is where we're headed. So it's going to be a 2-step process: public input one night, decision step following the public input.
Right. In my email to council this afternoon was asking them suggesting we would on the January 14th.
Perfect.
That evening, that gives us a week to digest what we've heard. If we have more information we need from staff, we can go ahead and ask for some redirect and get some more information, get that by, in our packet. And then we can discuss, and it will not be public input that night. That way we can spend a lot more time as a council talking about it around the dais. And also we can talk about it that evening as well too, but no decisions will be made on January 7th. It's just be discussion only and input only. And that way it allows David to return back and be part and parcel of the conversation, further, and also part of the decision-making process.
Thanks, and I'll watch the video.
Yep.
Perfect. So we probably won't spend a lot of time on step 3 of the presentation then, knowing that you're going to break that out from tonight. But those are 2 good leading questions about what ultimately we're going to need from you to move forward with the project. Obviously, a lot about direction tonight. And then once we understand that, we can start to work on the categories of land use, how the housing types, how the densities, how those things are meant to come together for both existing city as well as the growth areas. So that'll be the really important next step after tonight. Go ahead. Again, 15,000 people. We evaluated all of those 4 facilities. The one that's a little bit unique here is public safety. We did work with the fire department and our GIS staff to look at how fire response works and what the implications are for different elements of growth. So we highlighted that in each of the individual areas, whether there was a significant issue to address or not. And I think you've seen this many times. Back in July, RDG created this. Then we moved on and put it into GIS so we can analyze it in more precise detail. And that's what all this analysis is based off, is the hand-drawn drawings being migrated to GIS. Just as we had said in the presentation, the tiers are going to be broken out. And from there, Marty's going to start to go into the different areas.
Right. So just as a bit of a refresher, each of the 4 areas, or actually 5 areas, are broken out into 3 or 4 tiers. The immediate first tier, tier 1, are areas that are really relatively easily served by incremental extensions of public services or transportation. So you'll see these in blue, and they represent a first level or first piece of sequence in each one of these areas. The later tiers require a bit longer extensions, a little bit more transport, or sometimes a lot more transportation, a lot more population. If we added the population capacity of all 5 of these together, we would wind up with essentially doubling or increasing the population of Ames by 2.5 times. So as we now go down into this process, we'll look at the evaluation of each growth area by tier, and then ultimately a series of 6 alternatives that break these down into different combinations of individual tiers. So one of which is taking all the tier 1s of each 5 areas together. So now this was the map that we sort of had prepared for our last meeting 2 weeks ago, but had in kind of blurry form so that we weren't getting quite so specific. But this gives you an idea of how these specific tiered groups wind up breaking down on the ground. So the blue areas in each one of these growth areas is tier 1, those areas that are most immediately available. The green area is tier 2, growing out from that. Tier 3 being purple, tier 4 being orange. One kind of shorthand way of looking at this is that tier 1 or some combination of tier 1s and tier 2s get us to our year 2040 growth population. The purple and oranges are longer term than that, taking us beyond that. But a good plan, and we hope that this will be a good plan, says that we might be planning specifically for a 20-year period, but we want to know, we know that the city's not going to stop developing after that period, that the growth will continue. So we want to know what's necessary to provide for the longer term growth. So you plan for 20, reevaluate after 10, and realize that we actually do try to look 40 or 50 years out in terms of the long-term future of the city. So wonderful thing about planning is that you look beyond your own lifetime, so you're really going off into the future. This we showed you this at the last presentation. It's the basic evaluation or guidelines for why we classify different areas tier by tier, and I certainly will not go through these, but they're there for reference reference sake. Very important in the tier analysis is ability to provide service. So a major cost to consider is the overall extension of transportation facilities. They're easier in some areas than in other areas, but that's one of the factors that we break out. Here you can see faded out the 5 growth areas, showing the extent of the existing water distribution system. So it's really kind of interesting to see how the incremental growth happens from there. The existing sewer system, again, with the 5 areas ghosted out there, the storm sewer system, and those give us the kind of basic things that we need to extend, or the capacity that we need to analyze in order to decide what's needed. One interesting thing is that we're really pretty well situated in a lot of ways for sanitary service for the next 20 years. Not that there don't need to be improvements, but there's capacity there, particularly on the north and east sides, to accommodate growth. Couple of notes. One is that we are looking here when we talk about specific improvements at those things that are necessary to serve those identified areas. But keep in mind that those areas can have an impact downstream or on other parts of the city. So we haven't really talked about those here. They usually begin to manifest themselves in later tiers or later periods of growth. When we show you a cost, it does not mean that the city is responsible for that cost. It's just the cost of doing that, what the policy is to allocate that cost between public and private sectors is an open question right now. A lot of it is private sector. There may be some areas that require more pioneer improvements or projects. I don't know, Kelly, did you want to add anything to?
I did, unless you guys had questions about that. We aren't proposing any particular cost policies tonight. This is one thing that's to be understood is when an improvement is shown, it's assumed at that cost to be the full construction of a brand new whatever that is. If it's a mile of road,
Right.
if it's a trunk line or a water line, it's full cost. Not trying to talk about cost sharing or anything else. So just keep that in mind. It's a cost somebody will have to bear
In today's dollars.
in 2019
In today's
dollars.
Yeah. We assume for modeling purposes that there's a certain amount of quote background industrial growth that the East Industrial area is factored in, but there's going to be a general location of industry, and that's going to get that's factored into the calculations. The traffic analysis and specific projects related to that use the 2040 transportation model. But since we don't have a northwest scenario, we're not going in that direction, that's taken out. And so the model is modified to recognize that change. Water and sewer based on current conditions, growth's added into that model. You might talk a little bit about, Kelly, fire response and public safety considerations.
So I think the bullet is meant to basically acknowledge discussions that the council's had about the Station 2 in Campus Town, and it's probably not an ideal location in the long term to keep it on Welch Avenue, and council's asked staff to investigate that. We don't know for sure where it's going to go, but all of the fire analysis assume that station would move somewhere out of Campus Town and to the west is what has to happen to maintain service in that part of town. So that was just an assumption that was built into this.
So with the sewer, you're assuming lift stations or not, no lift stations?
It would be, Joe, do you want to?
Not many, but
It's dependent on the growth area.
So we talked about going north, it's going to require us to build some lift stations.
That could be, yes,
But
correct.
but my question is, in the work that you've done, have you assumed that as part of the costs?
That's correct. If there's any need for a lift station, that is included in these costs.
That's helpful for us to know. Thank you.
Yep.
So it's kind of like the all-in cost to deliver that service to the best that we can know at this point in time.
so this is an interesting map because this would be the added ultimate transportation system if everything were developed all at once. Now, in 60 or 80 years, who knows what we're going to be traveling around in. But so it could be a very different mode of travel. But again, based on the brains of people in 2020, this is that we'll break these down area by area, but this shows what the kind of growth system would look like. The little numbers that you see are the population projection or capacity of each of those areas. So for example, where you see a 2152 here next to this little blue area in the East Growth Center, that factors out to about 2,100 people in there. And our different scenarios involve combinations of those tiers, primarily looking at tier 1 and tier 2 areas that get into a 15 to 16,000 person range. So that deals with 6 different options for how the city grows from now through 2040. So now we go into the specific growth centers. So in our north growth area, you'll see that everything below 190th Street. Yeah. Oh, over
We're on
there.
the other screen.
Which screen?
That's better.
Anyway, that's right, we got 2 screens here. Yeah, stereo. So everything below south of 190th Street, which we really see is the current level of incremental growth in Ames, that's almost a given, is Tier 1. Tier 2 is between GW Carver and the railroad. That requires some additional sewer work, as you'll be able to see, but it does not involve heroic transportation measures. So Tier 3, getting into the area east of the railroad, the north-south railroad line, has the troublesome problem of Hyde and loading traffic into that. So it requires a pretty significant transportation investment in order to deal with that specific problem. Specifically, an arterial or a collector that distributes traffic better, that might involve something as extreme as a grade separation to get traffic off of Hyde and into other places or other major roadways.
So you have some options for routing traffic back in aside from Hyde?
We do. It's on the next slide.
Yeah, you'll see it in a minute.
We'll come back to that.
Right. So this is so these, and every one of these is formatted the same way. So these are our water. So you can see what's necessary for water service. So in Tier 1, we're talking mainly about local distribution mains. In Tier 2, pretty much the same thing. In Tier 3, we get into significant water impact and the need for a water tower. Collection mains for sanitary in Tiers 1 and 2, and then in Tier 3, a significant item here and a concern, or at least an issue that to test that involves a piece of major trunk sewer.
So can we go, I want to talk about this a little bit. It kind of ties into a couple of different areas of town. So if we can go back to the sewer map of the city.
Yeah.
If I can borrow the laser when you get a chance.
There you go.
There we go. Perfect. Okay. So this is the existing sewer system map. So everything has to get into this system. Which one is the laser? There we go. So north growth has to funnel over here on the east side of town. And you can kind of see that the city's obviously divided by essentially Squaw Creek. We have 2 different main trunks that come together into the one that goes to the plant. So what we're talking about is there's a pipe right here that's 36 inches, very large pipe, but it serves about half of the city. Maybe not quite half, but some of the growth, almost all of the growth from the east or the north has to go into that area. So it's been a concern as we're going through the modeling to look at what that means. And what we've tried to do, and Joe can talk to this more, is look at what can it take, and then what else would be necessary to support growth that's beyond its capacity. So we've put East Industrial in there, and we've told you a lot that East Industrial is kind of a shot in the dark because you don't know what the users are at this point. We can only plan for so much capacity before other issues arise. So I think HDR believes there's at least some, if not significant, capacity for multiple tiers here.
That's correct. Yeah. So as far as capacity, there's about, in that stretch of line right there that Kelly points out, there's about 4.75 million gallons per day capacity. Now, if just kind of put that in perspective, the north growth area, if that completely builds out, that's about 2.3 MGD, million gallons per day. And then the east growth area is about 2. And then like Kelly mentioned, the east industrial area could be anywhere from 1 million to 2 million gallons a day.
So I think it's one that tonight we feel like it works. It's one that I think we want to keep a very close eye on as we move forward in the tier discussion and the directional growth assumption that as we do this, that we're not discounting some significant thing that may be necessary in the long run. And the other thing that isn't factored in, and we'll have to be cognizant of this, is a lot of the infill areas we showed you in the December 4th meeting, especially the downtown Lincoln Way area. It's in the same system. So when we did the corridor study for Lincoln Way, we did some analysis for downtown and the Lincoln Way area, and there was capacity for what we talked about then. We'll just need to make sure that some of the stuff that comes out later is still there too. So you have a lot of things kind of competing for one large pipe, and we're trying to avoid that cost. But if it gets tripped, we'll add it to the process and definitely make sure.
But I think it's fair to say that it looks like the earlier tiers at worst can be accommodated by that pipe.
I think that's the conclusion I think we reached this week was clearly the tier 1s worked and some elements of other areas would work as well.
That's correct.
Well, this is a really an important point because earlier this year we talked about the fact about water. How much water are we going to push out to the East Industrial? And if you start having people come or businesses come and they may be a high water user, we need to have all this factor and all this information clearly understood. And so does the people who are doing economic development and, the chambers, that if we choose north for a full build out or choose east, we need to understand what that total flow is going to be and backing that out. Do we want to be limited in terms of what we can approve or try and encourage or attract? In the East Industrial, we don't have one person there yet. I mean, we will be having businesses out there, but that was a big factor in terms of a high water user.
So we want to be very conscious of that. And what we've tried to do, so Tracy gave us the information that we put into the site certification process. And we've tried to load that into the model to at least reserve what we put into the site certification process. But as you said, and that was a big number, that's 1 million gallons a day, I think is what it was.
Yep, 1 million.
It's not 2 million. So if council wants a policy to reserve significant capacity for the East Industrial, you do need to take it away from the residential.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something to think about. We're trying to show that a little bit of everything can work, but if there's a push for some point of emphasis, we'll need to know that. And we'll talk a little bit more about other things that happen when you get to the east scenario.
Well, I know that 1 million gallons a day sound like a lot, but for some businesses, that's not uncommon. So we got to be careful. Harvey?
We've had companies.
And I don't want to get ahead of plant capacity. So one thing that this exercise is focused on is just directional impacts.
Right.
We're not talking about plant capacity.
Right.
So if
Understand.
East Industrial had extreme users, it's a plant capacity issue, maybe more so than a pipe capacity issue.
Well, that's just the point, is that we have to frame that in. And that's if we decide what's best for the city is going north or east, then that factors into our decision-making process.
Exactly.
But also, it also affects other entities. We just want to make sure that we have all the data and all the information in our decision matrix, so we don't decide one thing and say, oh, well, we didn't realize that, or we forgot about that. And there's a lot of moving parts here. I know you're taking those into consideration, but I presume that the 1 million gallons per day came from working with AEDC or other entities and had some kind of idea in your site certification. That's kind of how that was arrived at, as being a
I
good.
think it came from Public Works and Water Pollution Control talking about plant capacity.
We overbuilt by that amount. Remember that?
Yep.
When we sized the water plant.
So it wasn't AEDC saying we would like these people to come here and have that much capacity. Instead, it was we have this much capacity. Be thoughtful in what users come here.
Okay.
Devin, you probably didn't figure you were going to talk so much about sewers.
Oh, I love it.
Okay, then we get into to storm. in all of these projections,
Excuse me, on the previous slide, I'm not sure I understand what the difference between the top and the bottom images. The top is water and the bottom is sanitary, is that, or?
yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
yeah, you can, actually, it doesn't show up real well, but the lines.
That's just where the
are
pipes
green,
would be.
yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
But it
wanna-
hasn't, the green has nothing to do with tier 2 green, it's just sewer. green.
It's sewers,
Okay,
right.
thanks.
Mhm.
And we do want to point out one thing. When we first presented this back as an idea in July, conceptually, HDR looked at whether we'd need a force main to bring sewer south into the city. So it's still shown there on Highway 69, but right now we don't think that's necessary if growth comes up off of Hyde. If you have growth on either side of this area first, you have a different utility issue to deal with. And right now, the capacity is stopped at midpoint of Hyde, waiting for Rose Prairie to develop and extend some of the connections north. So it's very incremental, but if you show a large growth area, it's going to be a question again, which direction or which side of those. In some cases, the north is the one that's the most obvious for that. Some of the other ones don't have that issue. So go to traffic.
Okay, so traffic, these are color coded by tier. So the traffic projects, again, using the lens of 2019 or 2020, the blues are projects that would be needed to serve tier 1, such as a 3-lane section on GW Carver. Greens, again, will be tier 2 improvements. Purples will be tier 3. So that's why you see something like, a project like taking Cameron School Road and going over the railroad to get to the other side, because that becomes a way of distributing traffic from the east side off of the Hyde situation and over to another route. So that's a constant sort of scheme that you'll see in all of these in all of these maps. So important thing to mention is that every time you see sewer, we're just assuming that that's incorporated into transportation costs, because that's when the storm sewer is built, unless there's some special requirement. So in transportation, tier 1 involves work on the Hyde Avenue corridor to slow speeds and calm traffic as that enters residential areas. Also to continue a parallel local street so that the problem is at least compartmentalized. Doing GW Carver is a 3-lane section through the growth area. Tier 2 doesn't, that's also incorporated into tier 2. Tier 3 gets much more extensive in terms of transportation projects that are needed to serve that bigger growth sector. For public safety, we'll need a new fire station here or somewhere to meet response time goals.
So when we make that statement, we're not saying a fire station is here. We're saying a fire station somewhere in North Ames.
Yeah,
is necessary.
somewhere in North
Would you
Ames.
need that anyway, even without this addition?
So the analysis was overall for the city, we meet the citywide goal.
Right now?
Right now, with the way we're way we're staffed with 3 stations. As you continue, or if you continue to creep north, it gets outside of the regular response area and it starts to dilute your overall average. So when we talked with Rich, with Chief Higgins, today we're fine.
Okay.
It's really dependent on the direction of growth, whether there's an impact of fire.
Well, a couple of questions. One comment on public safety is that the $6 million for the station that's just the down payment. What's the cost to staff?
Well, in today's dollars, it'd be over $1 million, $1.4 million in today's dollars.
So
That's not given that-
so our annual budget will have to go up $1 million, $1.25 million to staff that station. So I think we just got to keep that in mind as well too, in terms of planning. Whereas I know you don't put it in front end costs, but it's something that we'll have to take in consideration. It's going to affect tax dollars.
So one thing we haven't done with any of the growth, whether it's directional or not, is talk about city staffing levels. Clearly, a station needs staff. You don't have that. But there's also, when you start to do that calculus, there's clear benefit to existing residents also, from the personnel side at least. So it's an interesting equation to try and figure out. There's not one model for that.
So on-
Overall, we're having to staff in order to serve 5,000 to 6,000 additional housing units.
In that case, yeah.
Yeah.
So on GW Carver, you show that the blue line going to, you say it can be
Yeah.
three lane. What happened?
Oops, sorry about that. I hit the wrong button.
You can just say, I don't want to answer the
Now I'm
question.
lost. There we go. I did hit the wrong.
So on Bloomington, where it transitions down into 2-lane, is that going to be on Bloomington to 2-lane and then to 3-lane? Or are we going to actually come down and try and pick up all of Bloomington and GW Carver, so we have a continuous, because that's really got a lot of traffic
Yeah.
already.
It needs to be continuous. It's
Well,
continuous,
I mean,
I think.
There's no need to continue a center turn lane if there's nothing to access. So the 3-lane is only in areas, it may drop down to 2 in those curves where there's no development.
But there are some ons and offs to different housing developments going north that's actually south of where that blue line terminates.
Absolutely, and in that kind of level of detail, I mean, this isn't going to get to that level of design, but for sure, it's more of the capacity of that size of cross section. So if it's going to be extended another 1/8 of a mile into town, I mean, there's enough rounding error in these numbers to cover things like
Yeah,
that.
I could have made a mistake in not drawing the line right either. Exactly right.
Well, I just want to make sure that we don't, it just seems to have 3-lane to 2-lane to 3-lane. I just want to make sure that we have continuity, because if we're going to do this kind of work, that we have.
So that level, as Damien's saying, that's probably more of a level of precision that would come
Right.
later. And these are comfortable numbers, I think, is what Public Works staff.
That's good.
We're very comfortable that reflects a cost that is not low.
That's good. Thank you.
So just to be clear, the fire station would be necessary at any of these tiers. If we do tier
That's a good
1, we
question.
have to build a fire station.
Full build out of tier 1.
Okay.
So it's not that, because we have partial build out now with Quarry Estates and Hayden's Crossing,
Right.
and we're not saying that we're not meeting expectations now. We're saying at full build out, that's a different story.
Also, it's easy to visualize the ongoing costs related to a fire station, but are there any sort of comparable big ticket things that we should have in mind as we're thinking about this going forwards
Big ticket for operations.
for operations?
We have to add police, parks and recreation.
Water tower?
But I guess I mean something that's particularly locationally dependent, like this would be. Whereas I think, if you grow the population, no matter where you grow it, you're going to have to scale up your services kind of equally. But this is something that is because of its location.
It's not an
That's
ongoing
right.
cost.
You have a park, you have to have a park in any,
Yeah.
Right.
with the population increase, you
Yeah.
put it in any direction.
Staff.
So it's not, and probably with police districts, they'll be in either way you go. But we're trying to show the difference here in terms of meeting your fire response goal.
Yeah, it's important because we have one option. It does not require adding fire, and
Fire
that's
station, right.
the south option. So that's why it's
We'll go
important.
through, we'll go through it.
Well, according to this slideshow, it says it does not, we can serve that from station 3.
I think this is the only direction that requires a
new-
or say not just the south.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
My apologies.
Definitely the only one in tier 1
Yes.
that triggers a big cost.
Okay.
Well, and then in the tier 3, the 3-lane widening, there's almost $50 million worth of road work there that's outside of the city limits.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an interesting thing just to roll around in the back of your
Yeah.
head.
So that's part of it, but you're part of an MPO that has that road network. So if you think of it as an MPO obligation, in addition to within the city boundaries, again, there's not a clear answer on should you assign all that cost or not. What we're showing you is at the full build out, there's transportation impacts, and you may need to mitigate those with big road improvements.
I mean, should we even be, I think the information is good to have, but should we even be focusing on tier 3 right now? at this-
Probably not.
Yeah.
We'll get there. So remember, we're looking at each of these as if one of the options, or one of the sort of global options, is that we load all of our
What-
growth into
right.
one of these.
Right.
So this is why it's broken up this way. And then what we're probably going to be recommending as the actual alternatives is a combination of 1 and 2s.
Sure, I just don't want to panic people or,
Yeah,
into thinking
Yeah.
that
They're gonna
we're
widen
going to have,
Yeah.
$50
Yeah,
million dollars.
and you'll see that there's a real economy
Yeah.
to doing it by breaking out the earlier tiers.
And I guess my intent wasn't to scare. It was
No,
just to
no.
recognize that we would have partners
Yeah.
in something
Yeah.
like that at some point in the future.
But of course, as we're considering all of these things, we have to be thinking, how much are we investing in a tier 1 or tier 2 development that might make it more logical to also do a tier 3 in that same location? Because if we put a lot in on the front end, then,
That's right.
you may want to continue in that direction. So it makes sense to be considering the tier 3 costs, even if we aren't immediately going to be spending that money.
Yeah, where that starts to really, I think, resonate is in the, I would say the quote, new community options, the one that are, which would be east and to some degree south, that are, if not exactly towns, they're sort of somewhat self-contained, multi-purpose developments that are somewhat separated from the body of the main city, as opposed to the ones that are like west or southwest or parts of north that are more incremental and a continuation of current development. So that gets into that kind of big issue of a vision for the city, and how it should grow, and there are arguments for and against each one of those. Okay, any other questions about this one, about north? Okay, now we go east, so now we're entirely accommodating all the population in tiers east of I-35 between 13th Street and what would that be, Riverside, or whatever that section line is.
Future extension of
Future
Riverside.
extension of Riverside. So again, you can see that we don't have a tier 2 here. It really doesn't apply because of the level of capital investment that needs to be made in order to open these areas up. So tier 1 is actually quite incremental. Tier 3 and 4 gets into some major stuff. And so that's where if a developer said, oh, gee, this is really a great idea, we will develop new Somerset out or new Ames out here, then it makes sense to go into that kind of level of investment that grows to that kind of a population. So in water, tier 1 is incremental, it's distribution mains. Tiers 3 and 4 continue that, and now we get into bigger costs like a water tower or looking at other provisions that provide the water supply out in that area. Similarly for sanitary, tier 1 can be handled by local mains, but tier 3 and 4 gets into the issue of that Kelly was describing about the capacity in that Highway 30 to Lincoln Way.
And I want to chime in on that one more time. So talking with Joe this afternoon, the 21 million that we put in there is really sized, I think, at a 36-inch trunk line, so a rather large trunk line.
Which is a new parallel.
A new parallel,
Yeah.
completely
All the way to the
new
plant.
facility. The analysis says that if you only did this increment of growth shown here and some of the industrial, and that's all you were expecting, you could size that pipe smaller and take it down in size to a 24-inch, which was in the $15 million
range. Yep.
So that's where I would say, okay, we could lower the cost for a scenario, but did we just, again, hamstring ourselves for the next 15,000 by not spending $5 billion? So I think what we decided is we wanted to represent the 21 million here, because if you did that, it would be such a significant investment. You would want to maximize that, and you would be looking for way more than 15,000 people out here. So that kind of gets to Gloria's
Right.
question. At some point, you really want to double down on what you invested in. So we put the higher cost in instead of the lower cost here.
And you can see, we could have colored this all even a different color, but that whole area goes out to the drainage divide and adds much more population than the basic 15,000 that we've been looking at. So there is capacity for, another 10,000 people.
And it opens up this, I mean, we only did half of East Industrial. It's 1,200 acres, so it'll be a while to fill it up. But we didn't take the industrial park all the way down to Highway 30. So if you did this trunk line down Teller, down 580th, then that generally would open up even more area for economic development purposes. We're not pressured to do that right now, but if that's your long range vision for economic development, it also plays into the residential.
What's the, this is access to city wells and the under sanitary?
That's that trunk line I highlighted for you
Yeah.
earlier on. It doesn't have a name. It's out. There's a well access road that it runs.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
we're trying to describe it.
Yeah, it's access to City Wells Boulevard. Okay, from a transportation perspective, we've already talked about the storm sewer, so those are included in transportation. So in Tier 1, we're extending 13th as a 4-lane through the Tier 1 area. That continues on in the later tiers. You can see that extension. That also involves reconstruction of the 13th Street interchange. And then as we get into to Tier 4, then we start talking about an overpass on Riverside, because we're starting to hit that northern area that takes us back over to 69. And that, of course, gets to be a fairly expensive project. And then taking 13th as a 6-lane section up past the interchange. There are different ways of solving these problems too. I'm reminded of this quotation by Walter Kulash, who's a well-known traffic engineer, who's kind of the leading advocate for new urbanism among engineers, who said that dealing with traffic congestion through widening and increasing capacity is like trying to solve a problem of being overweight or obese by loosening your belt. That it works for a while, but not forever. So it's kind of an interesting quotation that keeps going through my head about. You widen and widen, and you can widen forever, and there's a practical maximum to how much good that does. And the point there is that building alternative routes, building a network is really an important thing to do.
Probably the right time to tag this on. So in the transportation analysis, it's strictly roads. We don't talk about transit.
That's right. Yeah.
Transit is it's a discretionary choice by the city council and the transit board of what routes to create and fund. So we didn't try to predict. I mean, we want to follow the complete streets hierarchy, which assumes that certain types of roads are transit designed to meet transit needs. So I think that we're not trying to intentionally leave that out, but because we can't say for sure right now how that would work, we didn't put it in because we thought it's too speculative. I think when you get to a preferred plan, you should think about what your preferences are up front about making things able to be served by transit, and when the funding's available or when that time is right, it's able to be done. But today we don't have that in the systems.
And when you say roads, you mean just roads, not sidewalks and bikes?
So sidewalks would be in the number. I think we just shared use paths are probably not in the full number, is my guess.
Right, it would just be standard sidewalks.
Yeah.
I mean,
and those
that is
costs.
my main concern with this East Growth area, is it is not going to be bike accessible at all, or pedestrian, just because of the distance to everything else, car only.
To the existing city, and then it has everything a town would have with it. It also has access to employment that no one else can bike to or walk to. So it is a huge trade-off. I get it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
it's hard to visualize. So clearly, again, we're not trying to get away from the complete streets typology at all. That's why we put that map in at the beginning. So when you see arterial street, it would follow that matrix. We would get those features in anything that's happening. And those incremental costs are not enough to sway you from a $14 million project, I don't think. So that's what we did to be consistent.
And why are we, why do you have to reconstruct the I-35 13th Street interchange? I mean, it loads up $18 million onto the project cost for, 4,000 or 5,000 more people.
Well, because when we did the traffic impact study for that regional commercial, that's even before this growth area, it's likely that interchange needs to become a divergent diamond, which is a style of urban intersection that can handle a lot of traffic throughput. The traffic volumes were in the 40,000. I think there were some around peak hours were some around, the daily traffic was some around 45,000 under that traffic impact study. And that's not without this growth area.
So one thing that's unique about this growth area is it has way more commercial in it
Yes.
than anybody else.
Yes.
So that whole strip on I-35 is commercial. So the traffic generation is more than everywhere else. And as Damien said, we already know that we're on a tipping point with just the Elwell Reuter properties. So really anything else is going to say, okay, we're
And-
definitely going to get
And it's going to
that.
pull some industrial too.
Yeah. So this is the one that's a lot different from everywhere else.
I'm sorry, go back to Ronald's point for a second. I thought we talked about extending multi-use trail out on East 13th Street out. So even though it's farther removed, there won't be.
Oh, we would, yeah.
35?
But
What we would say is when the interchange is rebuilt, that's when those types of improvements make sense, is to put them in.
Right.
then.
Long term, it would be connected.
right. Long term.
The
yeah,
question is
yes.
how long is long term?
Yeah.
I just don't like.
Raman, are you saying that it's getting from the city or other areas of the city out to that location is what they
Getting
concerned?
there in, it's just, it's automobile only.
Mhm.
And in terms of my preference for how the city would grow, it wouldn't be
Right.
to encourage an area that is only served by automobiles. I mean, yeah, the trail eventually when the intersection gets changed, but it's still so far out.
Yeah, we are going to factor trails into.
The trade-off
into the more
is-
detailed.
You go to the west growth area and it's further away from downtown than this is. So you kind of,
But it is closer to trail connect. It's,
Yeah, it doesn't
it's closer
feel it.
to
It doesn't
trail
feel it as much as
outfalls, yeah.
driving out East 13th feels like something.
So is it more of an impression about access to commuting destinations, or more just the network and the availability of access? Because I think that's the difference, is you could have a lot of access, but it might take a really long time to get to a commuting destination.
Yeah.
And they're not necessarily the same thing.
We have a number of employers on the east side that would benefit, I think, from having housing in that area. So I don't necessarily know that we have to get too far in the weeds that these people are going to necessarily be in the research park, for example.
Yeah, I mean,
So there may be very desirable if you're at the National Disease Lab. Now all of a sudden, this is a much more doable route.
and I mean, again, tier one, it doesn't require as much. So it's not until we get into the farther tiers where you're talking about a lot of people out there when it would manifest, but that's just my.
So from a standpoint of direction to the team, do we need to put a placeholder in for some additional investment in multimodal trails? So when we're
I just
doing
know
this,
that when we're talking about with the Elwell development, getting the bike path
Yep.
under
Correct.
Highway
Yep.
35 there is troublesome and expensive. So
I'm just saying that I think has been a council priority.
Mhm.
And since we're trying to have this matrix to go through and evaluate, if we're missing something, which you caught, then we should have
well, maybe it is factored in, like you said, with the interchange costs.
Now, an interesting thing
That
about,
would- yeah.
divergent
be real.
diamonds is that they
They're building
actually,
like a mile
they
trail.
look weird, but they're actually more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. Because in many cases, you can see some of these in the Kansas City metro area. Basically, diverging diamond flips the traffic flows around. So you're actually on the left side if you're going in a certain direction. And in a lot of cases, they work in such a way that the non-motorized vehicle and person winds up in the middle in a median as opposed to on the side. And having ridden through these, they're actually pretty good, although they seem to be weird, but they manage alternative travel pretty well. But of course, that would be built with a new interchange. You wouldn't.
Right.
So
Yeah.
So the other thing
Something I
that-
could also offer, just real briefly on it, is that all these numbers in the transportation improvements are assuming full compliance with the complete streets.
Yeah.
So when we're saying a trail facility maybe isn't in there, we're talking about maybe like a specialized trail facility or some kind of higher level than what you're seeing in the complete street plan. It is assuming the appropriateness of all modes in every kind of classification of street it's included in that number. It'd be if some kind of specialized regional facility was coming through here that we maybe don't know that we would identify like in the long range plan, that might come in here later.
And the last thing I'll note on here, on the public safety, it's a little different answer. Again, our response goal is a citywide average. And the way the modeling works, even though this seems further away, it is just outside of a normal response area for Fire Station 1 compared to North Growth is really far away from Station 1. So the averages work out. It doesn't technically need its own fire station. What is interesting, though, is most, if not all, of the area is outside of the normal response range. So how you balance that will be something much further down the road. It's definitely not a tier 1 issue. And clearly, if you did this and then we're all in to do more, a station would happen, but that's tier 5 or something that's not up here today.
So I just want to throw out one other thing, and that is if we're looking at this as very long-term, 2040-ish for tier 4, is there the chance that all of the predictions for autonomous vehicles are actually going to change the scope of what's necessary at that
they
point?
could make it worse.
Well, yeah.
It depends on who you ask. So some people will
Right.
say autonomous vehicles take kind of like human distraction and other things, and therefore we get huge leaps in capacity. Other schools of thought is it also technology has never lessened mobility, lessened access to transportation. You might actually have a zero occupancy vehicle on the road with autonomous vehicles.
That's right.
And that's like, you think about that and the amount of trips that
Oh,
can
yeah.
add to it.
Mhm.
So that's why for the transportation side and the transportation plan, we can take it at 5-year bites at a time.
Yeah.
So
Just as well.
yeah, we can do a
Yeah.
little course correction that way.
Yeah,
I hate
there are people who think it could actually make things worse.
So our recommendation, the prudent choice in 2019 is whether all the vehicles are the same as ours today, plan for the same amount of vehicles. And it's too big of an unknown and technological leap to guess otherwise. At this
Yeah,
point.
and electric vehicles, which are probably a little bit more probable in terms of our foreseeable future, are still a vehicle. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference.
Any other East growth questions? There's a lot to this one.
Yeah. Okay, South. So South is in tier 1 from a water point of view, again, is basically distribution mains.
Can you remind us what the major
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
streets are there?
Yeah, so here's 69 South Duff, right there. This is 260th. It goes, so this is I-30, wait a minute, I-35's over
Further off the screen.
And yeah, so the bridge that doesn't have an interchange on, it's off. There it is, right there. You
For
can
some
see the
reason, it's on
ramp
one of them, but not the other.
right over there.
On the traffic one, I think you
Yeah.
can see it.
Is university,
University is over here.
So the way the water main loop, that's Riverside right there. So University
Oh,
would be to the west of that.
And so that's Duff. And
oh, there's the.
Yeah, there's the
where's
airport.
Gotcha.
So the
Very
the
light.
traffic map might show things better than the
Oh, is
water
there a
map.
roundabout? I can't wait.
Where?
No,
in the
we're not.
middle?
We're in water. Never mind.
Oh, yeah, it is. It's a new thing. It's a roundabout for water.
It's a big valve.
Keeps the flow going better. All right. So we've got distribution mains. We do have a velocity issue along South Duff. So I don't know if anybody,
So,
Joe, do you
Joe,
want
I
to talk
guess-
about that? That's,
Well, that would be, if there's another loop, we show kind of that extra
Yeah.
redundant loop there that would help with that velocity issue.
I
Alleviate some
think-
of the stress on that existing system.
I think Stephanie talked about that in that email. It's possible this one has to be looked at a little bit more with Public Works. It was something that popped up at the end. I'm not sure that we fully have the cost of the solution in this water decision. I think that's when we'll have to respond back to you.
Yeah.
Because I know that Tracy, Stephanie works for Joe, and Tracy and her were looking at that more to see what that really meant, if the water loop was enough or not. And the water loop is represented here, but
One from Riverside coming down and.
so
going
that's
around.
represented. And what Tracy and Stephanie were talking about is whether another main north was necessary to connect into another line north of Highway 30. So it would be it'd be a big water improvement to do that.
Well, the other thing too is that if you have for redundancy for fire safety.
So the city's,
You're gonna, if you lose that one line, you're gonna have a whole area is gonna be cut off.
so the loop would have to happen.
Yeah.
It's a question of whether the system still performs with the loop adequately or not.
Oh, I see. what you're saying.
Or if there's main improvements to the north that would need to
Yeah.
occur. And that's what we're looking into right now with the modeling. Yep.
So this area has always been had a struggle. It doesn't really have a loop system to the rest of the city. So that's something that would have to happen with this. We couldn't keep doing what we're doing.
So Tea Garden area is not looped.
It's on one line south of Highway 30. Public Works has had a long-term water, and Public Works have a long-term goal to loop it to the north, not to the west.
Okay.
So when we're talking about velocity concerns, I'm assuming that's the velocity is too slow, not too fast, but I don't know.
I'm looking at Joe because I don't know either.
Yeah, it's
think so.
Right. It's that it's too slow. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I was imagining somehow putting a lot of pressure on there and just shooting that water through, creating pressure on the stress on the system, right? So glad you could clarify that for me.
yeah. Okay, so for sanitary, we have the trunk line going to the treatment plant, but need a new connection point, as well as, again, local collection mains. So that's about a $3 million item. Transportation, one of the big issues here, of course, is DUF. So the concept here extends, that's a blue line, extends the 4-lane DUF down through the Tier 1 area that then gets widened out, along with ultimately a connection using 260th Street and E57, future ramps on the interchange, our collector road, which I don't think we've included a cost for, along the edge. That's a reliever for DUF.
One thing that happened is
Yeah,
the way we did this doesn't actually show the tier 2 improvements. It's the big picture transportation map
right.
that shows you the other stuff that's needed for
Right.
tier 2.
That's outside of this.
So what
small
happens
area.
is north of Airport Road, there's major investments that are shown in tier 2 for the interchange, for widening DUF,
Right,
and then the
up here.
consideration of the grand underpass to make
Right.
this whole system work.
Right.
Remind me, you talked about this in our first visit about what the impact would be on Southdale. That's been a goal. It's not laid out well. We need more access points to it. How does this impact Southdale? Could you remind us of that?
Yeah, well, there's one of the things that is needed to make that all, we think to make that all work better is this kind of connector that goes into our town center that goes up through the edge of the Skunk River floodway there. It winds up hitting the state nursery. This is assuming that might eventually be an infill project, and then ties into airport. So yeah, you're right. I mean, it's part of the charm of the neighborhood in a way, but its interior circulation doesn't work very well.
So there's definitely no improvement to the north by doing this, it creates more capacity to the south.
That's
is
right,
what
yeah.
happens. And the interchange was interesting. That's kind of what happened. I think we were a little surprised by the outcomes, is that even with a new interchange and building 260th Street as a collector street to
Didn't
the
matter that
west,
much.
it
Says
didn't
model.
alleviate the primary issue of traffic on Highway 69.
Yeah, just as a point of reference, that building the interchange would only take off about 6,000 vehicles a day off of the Duff corridor. So not as much as we were anticipating.
And
So,
Now, I contend that if this becomes a big enough pain in the neck, people find other ways around it. But the models don't tell you that. so-
it didn't come out that way.
No, I know it.
It's supposed to take
I know.
travel time into account.
Yeah.
so maybe this is a question for Damien. I was trying to look through our long-range transportation plan and the state's plan. And I swear that at some point we were talking about the need to expand Duff possibly anyway,
Yep.
even without this new development.
Yeah, so the 3-lane that we essentially accelerated from what that we've done recently was an acceleration of a project that was anticipated in the long term of the current long-range transportation plan. And it was, since it was right at the end of the plan, it had a 3-lane and a 5-lane option. So we knew as of the 2040 long-range plan that when we get to 2040, there could be a tipping point depending on how much growth or how much external traffic we get. So obviously we went ahead and did the 3-lane. With what we feel, or the most likely thing, is that by the end of this 2045 plan that we're working on now, it would have been 5-lane, even beyond an additional growth policy of what's being shown here. So really what we're talking about is the 5-laning just again being kind of an accelerated from even what the current plan is looking at.
Well,
So we know we
then
need to do it either way.
with the 4-lane divided Duff Avenue under Tier 1, that's something that's going to happen anyway.
No, not exactly. So,
No.
right. So it's only a 2-lane road now, south of Southdale, right? So,
Right.
So
South
to
of
have,
Southdale.
yeah, so to have that capacity, that road has to be widened with Tier 1. The 5-laning that you're thinking from the LRTP would not have included that area. It would have been within
Oh,
the
okay.
city area now, which gets reflected in some of the later tiers having to be done.
Yeah,
That
the
makes
current
sense.
long-range plan stopped at Ken Merrill.
Right.
So that's the difference. There's more overlap in the later tiers, but not the first.
So, again, trying to get, don't want to get in the weeds, but in Tier 2, we have significant investment in terms of running. I need some help understanding if we're going to widen Duff from South 16th to Airport Road to get more, I presume, to get more capacity, and then we have to do this interchange. Why would we also extend Grand down to Airport over 30 for an additional $16 million?
So the underpass extension under Grand, just going back to the last long-range plan, was shown as an illustrative project, which means essentially in the 25 years of the last plan, we knew we needed to do it, but since it being outside of the 25 years and it was not fiscally constrained, means and we couldn't afford it. So that's what kicks it outside our 25 years worth of investment. So we know we need to do it. In this particular scenario, when we looked at these growth, doing the Grand Underpass from 16th Street down to Airport allows this growth area about 20% more growth before you'd have to do that 6-lane widening. So it just essentially it buys you some time. So you could facilitate more southern growth with that underpass before you have to go into a full reconstruction of the interchange of Highway 30 and Southdale with the 6-lane project.
I'm just trying to understand, Damien, from the standpoint, if, let's say I'm going north on 69, I get to Airport Road.
Mm-hmm.
I either have a choice, if I want to go ahead and I can go on Airport Road and then take Grand North. But why would you need just that couple of blocks of additional width to get up to 16th, when we're not really going to widen Duff all the way north, and you're going to take the same direction towards the stadium? I'm just trying to understand
The 6-lane isn't really about It's about getting on and off of Highway 30. I mean, it would make a little bit more sense if you could see the more technical volume map that was created that we generated these projects from. But you have, so both the Grand Extension and Duff itself has, yes, internal traffic through the city, but you have commuting traffic and other external traffic coming off Highway 30. And when you mix them, one way or another, you're going to have to probably increase capacity to get to and from Highway 30. So that's why you see both improvements. And doing the Grand Underpass is really just a timing issue for when you kick in that 6 lane in the south though.
It's just there's $40 million getting dropped into a tier 2 cost for the south expansion. I'm just trying to understand. It really colors this alternative, and it's just trying to make sure that,
But it might be needed anyway.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
thing.
Even
is
if you
that-
didn't proceed,
Right.
Yeah.
even if you didn't proceed with tier 2 here, the future Grand Extension and all that, I mean.
Right. So actually, one of our earlier options said, you can only really attribute, say, 50% of the cost of this to growth of the Grand Extension to this growth, because the rest of it has citywide benefit.
The challenge, maybe just to say the obvious, there's no federal, I don't think we should presume there's going to be federal money for this. So even though this is not a physical constraint, it's a fiscal constraint, being able to do something like that.
So
Who's going to pay for that?
Well, since this is a U.S. highway, we would expect state participation. I don't know what that would be. Damien couldn't guess what that would be, but it's not the same as Grand Avenue, which would be on our dime. Because it's a U.S. highway. Again, we didn't sort out any of these costs about
Right, that's
should we
not-
assign it
yeah.
to the state or us.
Okay.
It's again something that has.
And the interchanges are in that same category as well. I mean, you have to
Right.
bring in federal highway and the DOT, and it is a big gray area that every city has to deal with, is to when the DOT will say, we're putting it in the state program, or no, the cities have initiated it, you need to contribute. That's hard to say.
I'm sorry, we'll make sure to finish. So if we were to run Grand Avenue South under Highway 30, you believe that there would be access to federal funds for doing that?
No, sorry, that one would be
Right.
city cost. The Duff and the interchange stuff,
Would be
which is
state.
literally
I
you.
apologize.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That I assumed, it was the part going for Grand going
Yep.
under 30.
We could always
That's,
ask the state if they'd consider making Grand the Highway 69 piece. And then if they would, then, anyway.
and I think that's an
just a thought.
interesting idea.
Ask them,
but I
if
just-
once Grand is extended, ask them if they'd consider making that the 69 extension
Well-
rather than Duff.
For what you're talking
I
about,
might not want that.
it wouldn't provide us better access to state federal aid.
Right.
Because it's still not part of the their national highway system. Like the Highway 30 and the Interstate 35 have a whole different pot of money. They would, even if we switched it to Grand Avenue, Highway 69, they would still be an urban arterial in their books. So they'd want the NPO to contribute.
Well, and you couldn't
Yeah.
interchange with 30 either.
No, you wouldn't do an interchange.
Yeah,
I'm just
yeah.
saying that the underpass, the only federal aid that it's eligible for would be MPO funds.
Do we not have a project in the long-range plan, or maybe it's not quite the long-range plan, to do some work at the Duff Avenue interchange anyway, reconfiguring the access to the soccer?
Yeah, we're just reconfiguring
Yeah.
a ramp intersection. What's showing here is widening bridges and redesigning the intersection. I'm sorry, the interchange. So-
Okay, so this would be in addition to that
Way,
project.
way more significant.
Yeah.
Way
Yeah.
bigger.
Would you assume if this is rebuilt, it's an urban interchange also, or does that not fit this area?
No, actually, a divergent diamond would help really kind of make sense and consolidate the kind of odd ramps that are there now. And to the earlier point, it would also help the trail that's there. Because when you go to a divergent diamond, you don't have all this mixing of left turn and through conflicts. Everything kind of becomes little mini one-way streets. So when you're crossing it as a bike, you only have to look one direction. So it's actually really nice.
It's really nice, yeah.
Any other questions for the south?
Southwest. So this is encompassing everything from Lincoln Way, which is the north edge, south to another drainage corridor, which is, which one is, that's Worrell Creek.
Oh, that reminds me.
Yeah,
Someone emailed to say that it's not Whirl, it's Worley, W-R.
or Worley. Oh, okay, it is, you're right, it's Worley.
It is a
Yes.
debatable issue.
Yeah, I don't know. They seemed like they knew. So anyway, I said I'd pass it on and we should look and see if we didn't already. I can pass the email on. so
Sure.
you can see the
I've heard
credentials.
the story, and I'm not sure which way it is meant to be.
We should ask
Maybe
Board
the
of
geography. I
Names.
figure that's really where
Contact.
that should be where it goes.
So this triangle between Lincoln Way and 30 is overlaps between the southwest and the west. So that's actually a tier 1 in both of these areas. So the tier 2 area is south of 30. The tier 3 is out to the west along. This is X Avenue. This is Y Avenue. This is Dakota, and that's 240th. So we've got good water, generally good water service in all of these areas. However, this is where the Worley or Worrell Creek issue enters in. It requires a major sewer extension in that corridor. So there's a fairly significant item in there as well as collection.
So for those who've been following Southwest Ames for 20 years, that's
Yeah.
the same sewer that's been identified as part of the Worley Creek study. We didn't reinvent that study. We just used that data and moved it further west for this. So it's, again, I hope no one's thinking we're second guessing the work that went into that in 10 years ago.
The blue, the tier 1 is immediately serviceable as is.
Yeah.
So the one little nuance to this is the blues costs are rolled into the next slide with
Roll into
west.
the next slide, yeah.
So
yeah.
that was
Yeah.
not split out twice.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're looking here at a 2 and 3 component. So here's for storm sewer. Now here, the major transportation improvement in tier 2 is improvement of Y Avenue, although the overpass doesn't change. So it goes to an urban section, and then as we get later on down the line, it ties in, it brings X Avenue into play and requires the improvement of those two weird interchanges on 30. So that's the Lincoln Way merge and the X Avenue ramps.
So this should all be fairly familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's more growth. So the tier 3 stuff is new information,
new
but the tier
information.
1 and 2 should be very familiar from the 97 LUPP.
Right. And finally, west. So here's where this tier 1 area factors in, plus its neighbor to the north on the north side of Lincoln Way. So again, we don't have too much in the way of water issues. Same system serves that. We've got good pressure and so forth and so on. Sanitary involves.
So let's talk about
Yeah.
that a little bit. So the sewer is a little different here.
Yeah.
I'm going to let Joe talk about this because it's different than all the other areas.
Yeah, so the trunk line on the north side, if you could kind of point that out,
Or the
Marty.
laser.
Yeah, sure.
So you're talking about the
The northmost
Yep.
line. Yeah, that's, oh, sorry, go down to the
Sorry.
sewer. Yep.
right in here.
So that sewer line right now is at capacity. So any type of growth would put that over capacity. What we do note though is there's a current project to address existing I&I concerns downstream of Munn Woods. So we don't know exactly how much capacity that would create. That could accommodate the tier 1 growth, but really any growth beyond that in tier 2 or tier 3 is where we have those concerns with capacity. So again, as we note here, that could require collection main to go southwest under US 30, and it would require a lift station to connect up to the southwest growth area trunk line.
And I
So
know-
just wanted to point out that there's sewer capacity issues there, and that they would have to kind of have a redirect.
So Joe, would what you just said be reflected in this cost? Or is that not inclusive of what you just said?
That's not inclusive in that cost.
So this is a slight adjustment to the language from the presentation you
Right.
got
I see that.
to be clearer. So to solve the red is what Joe was talking about.
Is what I'm talking about, and we would have to put a cost to that. That's not shown here.
Any shot in the dark at a cost for?
Well, you would need a lift station, and you would need the trunk line on the southwest growth area. So you could probably add the cost of the southwest growth area to that. I don't know if you want to go back.
So that's in the 3 million.
$4 million range with a lift station too.
So one thing that happens is, so this growth area has 3 different sewer systems serving it, the north, the middle, and the south of Highway 30. And what this red means is you can't do any of tier 3 without that extra cost. And to get to that means you had to do the southwest sewer to get there. So if you rolled all of that in just to get to the north, that'd be a big number. If it's incremental 20 some years from now, that's probably a different answer. So we left it out. We'll make sure that's accounted for in the future, but this one's quite a bit different than the other areas.
So what are I concerns?
Inflow and
Something?
Inflow and infiltration.
Inflow and infiltration.
Could someone give me just 30 seconds? Why and where is that sewer capacity? I apologize. I don't remember that being a capacity. Where?
So this is going to go through Munn Woods.
And that's in
And it-
capacity.
It's at capacity now.
That's
And so we have a CIP project. I don't know if it's even already out for bid to do I&I work in that area.
Okay.
to try to improve the capacity.
Yep.
Of that line.
We've been doing that. We've been doing I&I work in a lot of part of the town. So we did quite a bit up north. We've done a lot in the southwest area as well. And then this is the next phase. So Public Works has a pretty extensive program to try and work on this stuff across.
So this
And how
must
much-
have been, I'm sorry, this must have been an older system because we haven't had extensive development that would put pressure on that. So this must have been an older, it just wasn't sized to,
Right, and I think it was identified with a large I&I flow problem. So that's hence the project to try to reduce that. and
Integrated.
improve
Okay.
capacity.
all right, that's a good thing.
Interesting how much scale that suggests. I didn't realize it was that if we solve the I&I problem, we might get actually significantly more capacity.
Well, I was just going to ask, what does Public Works usually find that they gain when they work on a thing like that for capacity? Any,
I'll speak out of my lane just because there's nobody here. But I am not the utility guy. So my understanding is that if you remember the sewer study and there was ratings on how bad they were,
sure.
the higher the 4 and the 5, they I don't know the exact number, but they were pretty much as much fresh water getting into as they were wastewater.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, it could be half,
50%.
but if it was like in the tier 1 or 2, I mean,
If it
the
wasn't
wrong term.
quite as damaged.
Yeah, it could be just like a 10% infiltration.
So we've been doing these projects for maybe longer, but from what I recall, really intensively working on these for the last 3 to 4 years. I don't know that they have an assumed effectiveness from the treatments that they're putting in.
Well, it's just like a lot of things. It's a large theoretical model, and until they do the improvement and we look at our flow meters, we won't know the number. But I think the more that happens, the closer we'll have an understanding of what we're getting, and then you could maybe redo and tweak some of these numbers. Right.
So it's important though. I want to correct, I think, one comment I heard. The I&I does not free up tier 3. I just did something to this.
Oh, yeah, you did.
There we go. So the I&I work will not free up tier 3. It may allow
Right.
tier
Right.
1.
Tier 1 and 2.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
one
That's-
can happen.
So so 1 is served by it, not this other part of 1 goes into this
okay.
line here. So it's more about this one up
Little
in this
bit.
area. So probably this can happen.
Yes.
Actually, this is a subdivision right here. So yes, it
Yeah.
can happen.
Yep.
I see.
It's more probably about tier 2.
Okay.
And if you recall, we have this sewer line is the one that works its way up to Lincoln Way and through Campus Town. And off and on again, you've had, we're near that capacity. So that still shows, but we can absorb what we're showing also without changing those lines in Lincoln Way and Campus Town. That, again, depending on the level of infill redevelopment, other kinds of intensification, those things pop up now and then as a possible issue.
Okay,
So are you going to be issuing a corrected or updated couple of slides and some costs to kind of take that into
I
consideration?
think we'll probably feed it back to you before you make a decision. Some other way than just updating the PowerPoint and posting it, because it'll just be a few details that we'll add.
Be important to make sure that when we distribute or have access, people have access to this for our public input section on the session on the 7th. We want to have that data.
We'll post this one up.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna. I can't tell you exactly what we'll augment for costs on things right now. We haven't talked through what can be done or what we will do exactly. If there's something really specific, tell us, so we'll focus on that.
No, he's asking about updating, correcting the numbers here.
Well, what you see tonight is what I'll upload onto our webpage again. But the additional data that I don't have tonight, I don't know what the time
When
is
you'll
yet.
get
I
that,
can't do
because
that.
of the holiday.
I don't have it in my pocket to put up tomorrow.
Get another pocket.
okay, so transportation, you can see that this is primarily dealing with the Lincoln Way and Ontario corridors. So tier 1 comes out to Y, tier 2 improves Y, and then tier 3 deals with X, much the same as Southwest, except it's north of 30. So that gets us to this, which is a comparison of the total cost of doing. This is as if we took all of the growth and loaded it into one center. And again, remember that this cost 65 million does not include that triangle. So these are, these are all approximately 15 to 16,000 people. And if we loaded that in, then these two probably come out about the same.
So there is one correction on this slide. The tables reflect it, but I didn't catch it on this slide. North growth is 101 million because of the fire
Because of the
station.
fire station.
So the tables on the next slide
Right.
reflect that, but
Yeah.
I didn't catch it on the map.
Yeah, that's right.
Before you get any further, Kelly, are we going to talk about the impact on school districts also and how it might impact tonight at all? Are you going to touch on that? or not?
We were not planning.
Because I was just looking at the map, and I mean, we got Gilbert on the north, you got Ballard on the south, you got Nevada on the east, and we got United. But my understanding is United and Ames have some kind of an agreement in terms of if we grow our city, that they'll go to the Ames school system, even
They
though
have
they're
a choice. It isn't automatic, but they have it's more streamlined than just normal open enrollment process.
But it's just
from my
interesting the impact it's going to have on the schools as well too, and also do we want more kids going into our school system or not too?
So as you said, there's 5 districts implicated by all of these things. The Ames district only has territory in the south and a little bit in the west. You're wholly in Gilbert to the north, you're wholly in Nevada to the east, and you're mostly in United to the west. It's maybe an influence on preference in the system or the marketability of the areas. I guess from a land use planning perspective, we're not really looking at that as an element of what work we're doing. So that's something that you're gonna maybe look at public input on, and you might grapple with that differently than us.
Right. So I just
I mean, to what degree should that be a tail that wags the dog? I don't sense that we have a lot of discretion here. I mean, we just happen to be a city that touches a number of different schools. I think it's more that they're going to have to respond. There's only so much we can do now. On the infill projects, that's another matter, because there we have issues of elementary schools that some of our decisions can be impacted. If they say, look, we would have a preference here or there, maybe that would be a factor to consider.
Well, I would say the impact will be different depending upon whether the preferred land use scenario puts all the growth in one of these areas versus combinations of tiers too. So that's really where the differences will wind up lying.
And we did, I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, that staff did meet with representatives from Nevada, Ballard, Ames, and United. We reached out to Gilbert. We're having a chance to get together with them. For the most part, they can't really respond to this level of planning.
Yeah.
I think the Ames district the geography of the Ames district, they only have one school in South Ames. So Kate Mitchell is probably affected by substantial growth in the south, and just is because it's the most extremely
Right.
located school.
Right.
The other institutions, they were more, I don't plan in this manner. So when I start to see subdivisions, then I'll have to start to think about what capacity I have.
I think
Gilbert planned for it. They've got capacity and built their schools to grow. And
Did they
But
build
not
them for
20
10,000
yeah,
people? That's
right.
not how
I don't know,
that's not
10,000.
how they are today.
Yeah.
And that's not how Nevada is set up. So none of them are set up
No.
for 10,000 more people. And whether that's 1,500 students or 900 students, there's a lot that goes into that because the neighborhoods change over. As we've seen in older Ames neighborhoods, you had kids that went to school. Then you have a set of time where there's not kids in those homes.
Right.
Gilbert's in a time frame now where it's very populated with children in homes. And is that still the case 10 years from now? And where does
Right.
new growth fit in?
That's very
It's
fair.
very hard for school districts to plan. And it's understood, but I don't think it won't direct staff's work. It'll be something that you guys have to think about.
Agreed. I just think I'd rather have all the cards on the table, make sure council is considering all those pieces. If it is determined to be not a priority to drive a decision, that's fine. We'll just document that. We just keep on moving on. But if it is something that's really important, I think it's got to be into the mix. It's not a financial piece as much as it is. Well, it is from a community standpoint, especially if you go south and Kate Mitchell's at capacity already. And we throw more in there, they're going to have to think about, our community have to think about how you're going to handle that capacity essentially. That's all. That's
Good.
It reminds me too, and Tim mentioned it at the beginning to reach out to counties, but Boone, with that Western, there's probably a lot of 2080s we'd have to think through, in terms of shared service. I don't know what we'd have to negotiate with Boone, but we'd want to make sure they're aware that
Yeah.
we're thinking about, I don't mean Boone City, I mean county,
Mhm.
obviously.
Before you leave this slide, I want to ask about the 104 million. Is that including the lift station and the trunk line that have to be put
Yes.
in to the southwest?
Not the
Oh,
new
no,
part.
yeah.
Not the piece we just told you
Mhm.
addressed that red text that was an edit tonight to the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
We don't have a number for that.
That is southwest.
And the
That's-
triangle blue in that west, is that in the 104 or the 65?
It's in the 104. Yeah.
So if you recall, west plus southwest is actually more than 15,000 people.
Mhm.
So that's one reason why it's more money, is it's more people than the other
Yeah.
ones also. So we have this broken down a couple other ways.
Yeah, so-
For you, this is one way to look at it. If you're kind of want to look at individual categories, that's there for you. Those are the correct
And
totals.
by tiers.
That's right.
By tiers.
Yeah. So there, it's interesting because you can see that an option that does all tier ones
Mhm.
is significantly less than everything.
Doing all, yeah.
Yeah.
What's the
All
population?
Not
All
surprising.
tier fours is
You'll
super
see-
cheap.
We have that on.
It's coming.
Yeah, do that first.
Yeah, all tier fours is- yeah, $17 million.
It worked backwards. It's perfect.
Yeah, that's because the only
It's
place,
cumulative. I
the
get it.
only place we went to tier 4 was in east.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, because we can't see that far.
Just go 4, 3, 2.
I think you have a map that shows the populations of tier 1. Is that
Yeah.
coming up somewhere? I think we
Yeah,
have that.
yeah, yes, yeah. Okay.
So this was
This is,
So this is a slide that we put in because we said we would try to tell you about traffic and vehicles model. There's a lot in here.
there's a lot in all this.
And traffic models are traffic models. I don't have anything more to say about them than that. Damien's now insulted.
Oh my gosh.
But for comparative sake, it's valuable. So the 2040 is your currently adopted long-range transportation plan and the growth assumptions that are in there. So for sustainability, the one thing that I would focus on is the VMT. Because the populations vary a little bit, we asked them to calculate it on VMT per person. So you can kind of see there's not a huge variation for most of the scenarios. Scenario 1 is really the only one that's substantially different than the other scenarios. And one reason why I think the numbers come out less than the current plan is you're moving that northwest growth out and you're kind of moving more growth into the city. So the trips are a little bit shorter. The current model has people in the northwest on North Dakota. So you have people kind of more removed from the city. So that's likely why that calc is higher. You can see vehicle delay. That's something that is good for the efficiency of the system, helps respond to people's day-to-day needs. The one I'll point out is in the south, we did do an extra task to model with and without the interchange because we really wanted to see if that was a major benefit or not. So it didn't maybe change those total costs, but you can see there's a big travel time difference. We're all the way at the end.
Sorry about that.
We're done.
All right, we're.
Right,
No, what am I?
This is
doing
fun.
here? I mean,
Take away the control.
I try to hit the, there
no.
it was. Yeah,
Back to-
I try to hit the,
One more.
laser and
One more.
instead I'm hitting.
So if you look on the very far right for the south, you see that 3.49. So you can see while only 6,000 vehicles went on that interchange, it had a substantial change in the efficiency of the system. So sometimes you can't tell what's happening, and then other times there are some pretty clear indicators. So is there any questions right now about this? We were really just trying to show you what we could about vehicle travel and how that might relate to, again, as a proxy for GHG emissions, is VMT is a common way to do that.
No, this is very helpful, but could you step back a little bit in terms of the assumptions? So this is assuming employers today. Is it also thinking about employers as the research park builds out and the Eastern Industrial Area? So
Yes.
it seems like those should be factors into this.
Yeah, so I guess this table didn't show total jobs, it just showed the increment. So there was an increase of roughly 3,000 jobs in each model scenario on top of whatever else was in the model, which also had more growth than today in it. So employment growth is in the model, it just didn't show up in one of these columns.
So, but my question is a bit different, is where the population is. So North Ames, it takes a long time to get to the research park.
Yes.
We worked on that.
Mhm.
We haven't even really seen it. We don't have anything yet in the Eastern Industrial Area. So one of the things that's intriguing about that area is that there's going to be people who work there. And it'd be nice for them to be able to just drive close to that. So I'm just trying to think through we need to understand the presumptions you're making in order to really know how to weight this.
Yeah, I don't know, because I don't know how the model is,
So Damien,
but Damien.
so let me understand a little bit more. You're trying to can you restate that one more time for me?
Sure. So I love the idea of trying to model this. And my question is, how do we think about the employment areas today where people are working? So Iowa State, huge employer, Grant Greeley and so on. But then also, we're adding employment areas. And so that's going to impact.
So that's accounted for. The geography is accounted for. So we break down everything into little blocks called traffic analysis zones, and we assign jobs and
Into each
housing
one.
into each little block. So if we're going to grow employment in the East Industrial, we actually divided up those blocks to add new growth into there. So now the model can account for travel from one side of the town to a new destination.
Yeah, so I'm assuming, I mean, I'm assuming that the TAZ that there's a TAZ for East Industrial Area, and it's got a certain number of jobs
Yes.
loaded into that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The only thing that I would say, maybe what Tim's concern is, if I can help, and correct me if I'm getting this wrong, is that these growth assumptions assume a well distribution of land uses, both in services, in employment, and in housing. If that doesn't happen, if it becomes very employment heavy in one area and housing and services in another, then yes, then some of these traffic assumptions will not pan out to what you're seeing. And the improvements that are respective of each growth area won't be, they'll have to be adjusted. But I think what we're assuming is you have a good growth policy that has well-distributed services, jobs, housing, et cetera.
Well, this is fascinating. I mean, I really appreciate you walking us through that because that gives us a sense that those things were actually factored in. So I appreciate your answer.
Well, and
I think
that's
your
where I
question-
think those colored maps have some kind of indication of different land use densities and
Yeah.
But Tim,
variety.
Tim's got a very good point, and that is, I believe that the research park is considering projecting there are 2,500 to maybe 5,000 jobs in the next 20 years. They've got more, we got more land coming in, we got more acres coming in, and so that's an interesting, dynamic that, unlike, I understand that you're trying to plan and distribute, jobs and commercial, around the city, but we do have a concentrated amount of jobs.
So
and it's gonna
those
continue to
those
grow,
specific areas are concentrated.
right?
So the like the north growth where there's a lot of housing, there's also commercial services planned
Right.
in the model. So
Right.
it's when it's true like manufacturing or office work, those nodes are heavily loaded with employment.
Right.
They're not spread across the city.
So those have been accounted for then in this?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the major employment areas are heavily populated with jobs.
And so we projected some growth in those areas as part of your modeling. All right, thank you.
It has to be reasonable. We have to have some, so it might not be what someone aspires to. It's probably less than aspiration to be more reasonable. Otherwise, you're going to show traffic improvements you don't need for 100 years because you're showing the worst case of anything someone can imagine.
Yeah.
I want to point out one little detail here that is really the situation of traffic. When you look at the south, you see across, we pointed out the 3.49 minutes of delay. Well, when it had more delay, less people, the VMT was the lowest. As soon as you add capacity in the system, it encouraged more travel. So that just kind of shows you that relationship that when you add capacity, it changes travel behavior. When it's a constrained system, it changes travel behavior. So those are the kinds of things that do come out with transportation policies and land use policies. It's not just mode trying to encourage a different split in modes. You're always having to compete in that travel time category. What's the best choice for me at the lowest cost is very commonly how this all balances out. And I think that's the only line that kind of depicts two different scenarios here, where you spend money to add capacity, but then it has the outcome of generating traffic.
Right.
Kelly, you said, I think, that VMT is what we should be looking at as kind of a proxy for sustainability. Why aren't we looking at the hours traveled or the delay when it seems like if your car is idling longer, you're actually using more gas and
So
putting out more?
So if we were actually running an air quality model that was going to factor in the fleet mix, you would compute that on average vehicle miles traveled against the fleet mix, and there would be a speed assumption. So it's not assuming that you're always traveling at exactly 65 miles per hour on an interstate. So if you really were running a traffic model with air quality to generate emissions, that would get factored in. In this case, we do not have that component. It's way beyond scope for us. So the only proxy is really that travel distance. So
Your daily VHT per person then is,
Dropping.
but it's remarkably close. So am I reading that column correctly? The daily VHT per
That's
person?
vehicle hours travel?
yes.
Well, I mean, because trips are so short that it's going to be a small range within the.
It's interesting though, but they're also close.
Yeah, but if you're in a place like Dallas, they're not going to be so close.
Yeah.
But the different levels of travel in Ames are not all that different.
And I believe this assumed those traffic improvements that we costed out were in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a fixed system. So I hope it operates relatively well. This is not the broke system. So it should that should be good news that the system shows a level of efficiency if you make these substantial investments, right?
And if we
If you make the
Yeah, so
If
this
we
is
didn't
after
go with
improvement.
this,
This is after improvement.
This is not current.
Correct.
And something too that would
Yeah, it is.
definitely not, I'm not trying to drag us into the weeds, but the aggregate number maybe isn't always as important as your trip length distribution. So if you have a good distribution of land uses and a well-distributed trip length related to it, that's where you can start to carve out real opportunities for multimodal and other trips having equal utility.
Yeah.
If you have a real peaky trip distribution, then it's kind of that whatever mode fits that trip length distribution, you're stuck with it. So that's a policy issue that I think is already inherent to just good planning.
Right.
That maybe isn't reflected in an aggregate number. So again, not to overthink it.
I have no idea what you just said. It sounded good.
Well, it's the,
I was gonna say that was.
the variety of trips.
If you distribute things around in a relatively even and rational way, the system is going to perform better than if you clump all the housing over here
But
and all
she's
the
gonna take
industrial.
a 20-minute ride. They're
Because really you have
right.
more, it's really saying you have more choices if it's
Not-
distributed
yeah.
versus the only way to get somewhere.
Yeah.
If it's 5 minutes to everything.
Well, you could run that
Like
type of
different
analysis
choices.
using the model, and we
And
could
that's why
give
time
like a
is so
chart.
important
but-
in evaluating.
But we can't see it on the figures right now.
Right. But they would be very similar because I haven't seen a growth plan that isn't kind of well-rounded.
So back to Gloria's question, I don't think anybody's going to be running this kind of an air quality model, but once you have a VMT for your city, you can assume an average emission factor, and it helps you do comparative analysis. It might not be really precise. It's really hard to be precise with GHG, but it helps compare options. That's what you're really trying to get to with most of these efforts.
So is there any way for a novice like me to understand whether the differences that we see in these rows, whether they amount to anything important from a policy-making point of view or not?
I think
From traffic, you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
I think the only takeaway was that all growth scenarios seem like they have fairly similar potential for a
Yeah.
traffic network. The south, the scenario 3, if for instance the DOT and federal highway says no interchange, then that tips that scenario pretty hard.
Yeah. That was the tough part about 3 is a lot of things are appealing, but there's a large dependency on the traffic being correct.
Yeah.
So I think you could maybe get away from some of the efficiencies and the amount of travel and focus more on the dollar amount. I think that's because this is kind of your benefit. Like, what are you getting for the money? And they're all fairly similar as far as performance goes. If you think about it more as a performance metric rather than just like a comparative number, they're all very similar. So that's where I think back to like Marty was talking about it. When you look at different tiers and what you're investing, kind of how you get really good efficiencies out of like combinations.
So that's where we go next, I think.
Yep.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, yeah. There,
Just had a transition slide.
okay,
So
yeah, I'm sorry.
quickly back to the red.
Yeah.
I think we told you that this has been online for over 3 months.
Yep, we had
Corey
a
wants to
number of
talk.
people who came in here. We had a number of folks that came in here and actually used sticky notes and provided comments on all the conceptual land use plan, and then we also posted that online. A lot of great feedback, and I think some of the takeaways from that, we've talked about it a few weeks ago as a group, and also even tonight. But with the north area, there's just concern about traffic congestion and just the proximity to the highways. There's growth already going to the area. There's greenway connections. People like that. There's some concern about just the environmental influence, comments about it's not being in the Ames School District. To the east, just quickly, doesn't necessarily feel like it's part of the city. People complimented how it looked like a village, but also people said that it looked too much like suburban development. So there's both things to that. Good access to the interstate. And to the south, most of the comments were favorable for this area compared to all the other ones. Just the idea as far as proximity to Des Moines and the thought that we're leaking people who are choosing to live in Ankeny and commute rather than being in Ames and commuting. Just on the note that I wanted to follow up on with the nursery, we show that as a candidate or that's subject to change. We're not trying to push that it would change, but just being cognizant that markets do influence land use. Concern about the proximity to the airport, and there's just concern about going across Skunk River to make that connection and the influence on the environment. Southwest, boil it down, most of it was just concern about the proximity to the farms and the externalities with that and people's enjoyment of property. To the west, generally favorable responses. Most of it was about jurisdictions and coordinating that. So that is hundreds of comments distilled into one slide.
So we,
now-
so Corey, if you recall, we have the public feedback document that we keep on our webpage. And we kind of get, when we get to the close of a major task, we update that. So prior to your decision making in January, we will RDG will update that and we'll make that we'll let you know when that's put up there so you can see what was done. They've been cataloging everything. So it's getting rather lengthy because we've been collecting input for 9 months.
That's good though.
And
That's good.
it's there for you.
Good.
I think we've made an extra effort to catalog everything we can. So there's a record for everybody.
So now we look at that kind of closes the section that says we load all the growth in one area. Now we start to put combinations together.
And this is the one note here. And the only thing I'll say is, so we said that fire station is only triggered for north growth.
That's right. Yeah.
When we modeled what Marty's going to show as you can go to that slide.
Yeah. Well, first of all, these are a summary of the 6 items we're going to talk about. And you can see that the population, once we group these things together, is almost all exactly the same. It's all in our targeted range. Some are very close to each other. So now we get to these combination scenarios. And the first one says, what if we take all the tier 1s and those are all, we go in basically 4 different directions and show our land use plan combining all of the tier 1s. So it's kind of equidistant growth around the center. When we do that and allocate the cost for all the tier 1s, it comes out to be collectively about $60 million.
And this is where I wanted to insert that we didn't add the fire station cost to all of them. The assumption is that this way of growing will trigger a force station. Where it goes, I don't know today, but the fire modeling said that as you keep stretching out in all 4 directions, the response will get diluted. So add 6 million to all of these is the prudent option right now. But the decision of how or where to do a fire station would come.
But it'd
further
be
down the
adding
road.
6 million to the 60, not to
so-
each one of
and-
those 4.
Right.
Yeah.
We're gonna have
It's
7
very
fire
expensive
stations.
fire.
So
On the bright side, it did take us to 5 fire stations to kind of do this stuff. It was serviceable with 4 because getting to 5 is a big cost.
Mhm. You
So
say something?
we thought it would be interesting to show how this relates to the infill areas. So you could, so our core disregard that big clump of that box. It doesn't exist. That's USDA. But our infill areas generally extend south along on either side of the Duff Avenue corridor and east and west along Lincoln Way. So interestingly enough, we have kind of a development cross axis that connects these tier 1 areas together.
Now, so there's no increase in population then?
So what we decided with the
Because your numbers are identical on both slides.
so with the infill, what we've said
We haven't
is it's-
dealt with,
consider it additional options, not necessarily population. It wouldn't mean we would have 18,000 people. We just think of distribute differently. Because we feel like we can't control the timing of these choices. So we didn't want to say, oh yeah, take 12,000 out to deal for the perimeter growth and put 3 in because we don't believe that we can predict it as well.
And do we need to add in the cost for that 7,400 foot long sewer if you're going to do the west?
No, so tier 1 is supposed to work with the existing
with the
systems.
existing sewers.
Okay.
Tier 2
That's right.
is where tier 2s are where the other ones
Yeah,
come in.
that's right.
And just while we're looking at this big map here, I had a question about the east area, but we could just talk about it since it's on the screen. That Kettleson Marsh area that's in the east, that's the part that's a gap.
That's
there,
right.
right? So
Correct. Yeah.
It's not.
It's not developed.
Planning on-
It's not counted toward anything.
Good.
What about all the farmed land, that's multi-generational farmland that I believe is within that blue area?
That's in here.
It's shown as being
Yeah.
urbanized.
It's shown as
So
being
any area with color is assumed to be urbanized.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's why you don't do a one-to-one correspondence and say that we're not going to have any flexibility, or because there's an efficiency factor. So we actually have taken the so-called maximum or full development yield and discounted that. So because it's not going to, it's 100% of it's not going to be available. So again, keep in mind that we're not getting to the level of saying, well, we think this property owner will develop and this one won't. It's a much sort of grosser analysis than that.
Well, I think it's a good point. I think we asked this question before, and that is, are people willing to sell around this area? And the point is, they have the right to say, no, I don't want to sell.
Absolutely right, yeah.
And so that's why I want to have some flexibility in trying to be.
In any direction we go, we're looking at the same.
Same situation, yeah.
situation.
And so you are estimating that to some extent just with a multiplier though, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we're doing a discount of, right. So that's.
We have what, 7 of these? I don't know
6
how
of
much.
them.
These are all just combinations.
They're just
Yeah,
different
they're-
variations.
so this combination, this is a north and west growth. So here we're saying, we're not doing the stuff south of Southdale. We're not going on the east side of the interstate. That we are going in this scenario to the 2 tiers along GW Carver. So you'll actually, almost every scenario includes the lower part, south of 190th of the north growth area, because much of that's developed anyway, and that's, streets are stubbed out, and the assumption is that's all going to develop. As well as tier 1 and tier 2 of the west and southwest growth areas. So that really is, one could say that's kind of a status quo option, that this is sort of a normal development, but you can see that it costs about 80 million plus 6. So this one.
That's not including the sanitary sewer improvements that were the red.
Right, because
Yes,
what
that's right.
Marty has
Yes.
outlined in black still doesn't trigger that sewer.
That's right,
Okay.
yeah.
We believe, depending on the I&I work.
But it
through
does
months.
trigger this one, that 1.5 mile extension is included in this one. So you can see all what's incorporated into those.
So other than this showing growth into Boone County, this is, as Marty just said, this is kind of where the LUPP would lead you today.
Yeah.
If everything was just incremental and sequential, one after another, and we didn't do anything else in the city.
Let's see, but I guess that's just duplicated, yeah. Yeah, so scenario 3 now says we do the tier 1 and tier 2 area north, the tier 1 area west and southwest. So that does not include that big sewer extension, and the piece to the east, which gets us about 15,000 people, and actually is the lowest cost of the options at 48 plus 6, so it's 54 million.
But less people.
But somewhat less people, so it's, yeah, so it comes out. Combination 4 is north, tier 1 in the west area, and then tier 1 in the south area. So that begins to include our south growth, which doesn't bring a whole lot in additional transportation costs. Those become a lot more significant later on. And that's relatively, that comes out at about 58 million plus, again, the fire station at 6. In scenario 5, we're just cutting out the north piece, or the tier 2 part of the north growth area, and doing tier 1 and tier 2 in the south, which comes out at about 66 million.
And that is literally the current land use plan minus northwest growth.
Yes.
So one scenario we never evaluated was keeping Northwest growth. If somebody thought that was competitive with any of these, we can drop that right back in. That work has been done in the past. It has sewer issues and it has traffic issues. We can,
And it has opposition issues.
so we could, if that's something that interests you, we can drop it back in and show you what that looks like based off prior work from the past.
That would be very helpful to put on the internet just for comparison purposes.
We'd have to create it as a table, but it's something we could look at to update it to this level.
Yeah. And then finally, 6 is a north-south scenario. So here we're doing tier 1 and 2 to the north and tier 1 and 2 to the south. And that one would be in the $75 million range. That again, anything north pulls the fire station into play.
So can you go back to that one for a second?
Yeah.
So in the south, I think we've talked about the south quite a bit. So this is the one where if you add tier 1 and tier 2 together, we're talking about 8,600 people, and you're talking about $50 million to make a substantial investment to do that. If you left out tier 3, I think the part that gets kind of left behind there is you probably still have some of those improvements to the west that over time would need to be done to kind of connect it back to the research park. It's a gravel road and not an immediate need, but it helps you give it a sense of if you went south, what's a reasonable amount you could do if we did that? Does it have to be 15? No. This is a price to do about 8,000.
So it feels like you look at the north area, some of that's going to happen anyway. That tier 1 is going to happen probably sooner rather than later. But you look at the east and the south, and it looks like those are ones that you probably want to commit more to, because at some point you're going to have a critical mass to have the amenities and the housing types and the commercial things to make it someplace that's desirable. So when you look at the tier 1 option where you have it in 4 different areas, I like the flexibility from a land use availability or the market driven perspective. But I'm trying to wrap my arms around how you balance that flexibility with a commitment to create
Something
a
new.
place.
Yeah, that's exactly where the sort of difference in where you start to think about how. Well, this one just kind of summarizes all the costs and all the populations. So several of these have to have $6 million added to them because that's the fire station.
All of them do.
All of them do, except they've all got north.
Yeah.
So all of them do.
Yeah, I would say for today, that should be the assumption. When you pick a way to do it, we can rerun it and see what that means. But until I have something more precise, it wasn't worth doing.
And so in looking at these numbers too, if this is a 20-year plan, and granted, it's not going to be a linear spend across those 20 years, but you look at how it plays out per year, and that those costs are going to be split between developers, between the city, basically between those 2 entities, maybe some federal government grants or those kinds of things. None of these really work out to be a lot of money per year.
Right.
I just find that kind of fascinating.
No, that's right. Yeah. So I think in a lot of ways you wind up evaluating these in terms of what do you think is better for Ames as opposed to what seems to be cheaper.
Yeah.
It's kind of what this is proving, that the costs are allocated differently, and one costs more for transportation, another costs more for sewer, and so forth. But ultimately, what this tells me, having put these things together, is that you think about what's best for the city. And if I were to sort of identify like 3 kind of overriding visions, one vision would be that we are building completely concentrically around the center. So something like the tier 1 in 4 different directions. It in some ways implies a stronger center and a stronger central corridor, whereas the ones that stress the south and maybe east to some degree are saying we're going to build a more multi-nucleated situation that's got these kind of satellite villages around them. And then the third thing is basically just going in the market direction. It's going, it's kind of finishing out to the west and finishing out to the north, and moving in those directions, which which we can fashion into a pretty nice scheme, but it's probably less, say, visionary or transformational than some of the other ones are.
So we've been looking at just on the cost side, but there's also a revenue side to this. And so as we add those homes and businesses, that's going to add on to the property tax revenue. So
Sure.
I just throw this out.
Yeah.
It would be inaccurate to look only at the expense side and not consider the revenue side.
No, totally. Yeah,
So-
except these are all basically the same population.
So, yeah, so that was the main reason why we didn't do that exercise, is we assumed whether you went north, south, east, or
It's
west,
the same.
the revenue would be relatively the same.
Yeah.
The business values are the same. It's all new construction.
That's why we didn't go through that exercise. We didn't make that clear here,
Mhm.
but that's why we didn't do it. It was
Yeah,
just,
it's about the,
So you're just pulling out just the expense line.
yeah, they're very much, within 10%, very much equalized in terms of population.
Okay, thank you. That's
Yeah.
helpful.
Although 2,000 more people in whatever that one in the middle is on the bottom, that's basically what we're doing now, right?
if we follow the current land use
Yes.
policy plan, to be
Right.
very similar to that.
Yeah.
So
Which one?
2,000 more there than in
one?
the,
Middle, bottom,
Dollar per
Then-
person.
this is
Right.
16773.
Mhm.
So the
Yeah,
other thing
that
that's
has
not
the best
factored in, so if you start to go that route, then east growth will start to look better because it has way more commercial in it versus the other one.
Right.
So there's, we're focusing a lot on the housing piece because, as we've said, jobs are kind of locked in south and east. Retail seems to be locked in at Duff and probably 13th Street and then downtown, with little commercial neighborhood centers kind of responding to growth. So that's one reason, if you really start to look at the revenue, facilitating east growth, which would have the best economic development opportunities, would show differently than the other ones.
That's very helpful.
Because you just can't put that kind of commercial on the west side of town. It would not,
Yeah.
would not thrive.
Right, that's right.
It needs I-35.
It needs I-35.
Yeah, it needs I-35.
Highway 30 is just not the same.
Let's see, what else do I have? Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
So any other questions on, we know it's a lot, that's why you're not making
Yeah.
decisions tonight. Any tier questions right now from that last map? Okay, so go ahead and let's finish it out.
Yeah, that's kind of what I just said,
Yeah.
that they're.
I want to underscore one thing. When you look at number 2, this is something we haven't said that I think is critically
Yeah,
important.
right.
Just because, let's say you just pick tier 1s, you still need to have a policy to reserve these other areas
That's
that
right.
you believe we can grow into. Do not get us boxed in with sporadic development around the city, because it doesn't look like it'll happen in the next 10 years. So as we move forward the preferred vision, we're going to be recommending a strong policy about preserving options for the city beyond whatever that geographic extent is that we pick.
Kelly, as the council thinks about the preferred option here, did you not send out a memo on criteria, decision-making criteria? Just a few food for thought you might want to concentrate on.
Yep. So number 4 doesn't capture everything that was in that memo, but again, I think the best part about this effort, and it was extensive, RG says they haven't really done it this way before, but it is very informative. There isn't one clear choice that's the cheapest and the best for all aspects of Ames. So that's why you really have to think through priorities and think about the different things that you can mix and match in options. So that memo hopefully guides you there. There's no way to probably score them all. I don't think it's a quantitative effort to pick the preferred land use plan at this point.
Yeah.
I think we've done the quantitative work that can be done. So next steps, I think the big announcement by the mayor was to say that we're looking at January 7th as essentially a listening session for the public to come in and voice whatever you like or dislike about the plan to the council, have a follow-up regular agenda meeting on January 14th, and have council give direction to the team from there. And the direction we'll be looking at is really that geography. And that last bullet there is telling you when you can give us the extent of your geography, that's where RDG can then
Really
move
get
forward.
into
We can get into really saying this is how the plan works.
Right.
This is what's going to be where. And some of those major things are going to be that future land use map, the designations, not just what's a density average, but what type of homes go into different parts of the town. I think at the last
Right.
meeting, you talked about different ideas. Again, what, accessory dwelling units, multiple units in single family areas, infill projects, all kinds of stuff. And those conversations are going to be coming up as soon as we get direction on extent, so we can start to work on the housing policies and bring those back to you so you can kind of pick how these categories work, what our housing influences are going to be. And that's really going to be
Right.
the foundation of
And,
everything.
and I would also say that I think, some of the comments are actually evaluations of the design or the layout of these individual growth areas. And that's all appreciated because it helps us see what people like. But it doesn't mean that that's exactly what's going to show up in the plan, that they're really sort of ways of doing a reasonable estimate of housing mixes and commercial and so forth so that we can get to this level.
And they were really based on all in for one direction.
Yeah.
Right. That's why there was always a center, there was
Yeah.
commercial, and there was a
Yeah,
mix.
so it's going to look a little bit different when we start to put this in the context of the overall city, which is kind of the next
Right.
step.
So on the 14th, you're really just asking us to tell you, one direction or a combination of directions and how we
Yeah.
separate the tier ones, tier twos, not to start telling you, we'd really like to see XYZ type of housing / commercial in this area. And
So
that's
I-
going
I
to come
think-
back to us later.
So depending on what you pick, I think RDG will go through the same effort that they did the first time
Right.
to make the areas as complete as they can.
Okay.
But you will, as part of that housing conversation, have to talk about what types of houses go in the areas
But
that we
that's
say
later.
housing. It'll be hopefully the same night.
Oh, okay.
As 2 items, but it
Okay.
will not be January 14th.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Not
Okay.
That will be in
January 14th.
February.
Okay.
That'll be
And,
your February.
and it
Okay.
will also include the existing build-up
Right.
city.
Okay.
So hopefully those two go together really well. We really want to keep them on the same meeting if we can.
Okay.
Right.
So that's the goal. And I think at this point, that'd be that February 18th workshop, your standard workshop
Okay.
night after budget.
So help us think about, as you're thinking about, let's say I'm just gonna make this up. Let's say I pick East, okay? How can you be successful if you have some people that don't want to sell property that are close in and some that do want to sell that are farther out? And how does that affect your planning? 'Cause I don't want to, I don't think we want to.
You provide enough float in the actual areas that are designated that
Okay.
you accommodate that. So, yeah, I mean, there is no way in this or any plan that you can go and really interview
No, I
property owners.
I
And they don't
understand
know
that.
what they're going to do
I
either.
understand.
So,
I think my answer to that'd be, if you're into an area developing, the risk you take if you just take an infrastructure improvement to the edge is you're always dependent on the
That's
first
right.
one developing, versus if there's multiple property owners, is it worth maybe a little bit more to open up an extra half mile so you
Yeah.
have 5 people to
Yeah.
work with instead of one?
instead of one. Mhm.
That's really probably the only way that the city can influence that is, and I'm not trying to say we're not going to be incremental. I'm not saying we're going to build 1.5 miles and open up 2 square miles so we get one person to build. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that maybe a little bit more is better than a little bit less.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a tough choice for a council. Again, how far do you go when you have to build something?
Good question, John.
Yeah, it's a great question, but it's and it's sort of inexact because you don't know what people's behaviors are going to be, or willingness to sell or not sell, or what heirs might do. It's all there's all kinds of things. So the best way to do it is make sure we have enough land designated for urbanization that we're sort of covering ourselves, but not so much that we're doing a plan that doesn't mean anything and it's just completely uncontrolled and sprawling.
So we did pretty well, 2 hours.
Thank you
and 10
very
minutes.
much. There's a
Very
lot of
well.
stuff here.
Thank
and,
you.
We appreciate your patience and
So I hope,
best wishes for
So-
Merry
so
Christmas.
clearly this was a big, high energy task. I want to make sure that you're feeling satisfied with what we're doing. You have a couple weeks to think about that. And again, the public input's pretty important on how this is going to come together. So if you have questions, you are supposed to give us any thoughts you might have on the land use principles. We didn't talk about that, but some of those land use principles are baked into this. So the idea of minimum density is baked into Marty's totals.
Space. Yeah.
So ultimately, some of these numbers change if different policies change. But for today, we're trying to be consistent and follow through on what we've told you so far.
Well, and just to highlight your second bullet is, council, we were supposed to, and we had a lot of stuff we've been doing, but you got, January, you have a December 25th and January 1st to just dwell on this. Just the key is that if you get some comments, January 10th is the deadline to get back to people or to staff on the principal feedback. And we will encourage public also to offer input on those principles as well too. So it's principles as well as these scenarios, because we want to kind of capture what the tease out from the public, what their thoughts are on both of those. So,
Kelly, if I could offer one thing that, since we are in the process of updating the long-range transportation plan, this land use direction, policy direction, will help set that future amount of what the network. So our plan's efforts will be heavily driven by this, and that plan needs to be adopted in October. And so one of the things that when we come back, like our design team is HDR. Is the one doing the long-range plan, will inform the group when, regardless of kind of what this plan is going to do, we will have to make some cutoff point for the sake of the long-range plan to say what future traffic looks like, or future land use looks like. So hopefully we're not past any point of no return, but the long-range plan will have to make some decision. Hopefully it will line up and that we'll have more information as like when those dates are. So if there's information that you need to help guide this process and not delay it in any way, but the more we know, then we can stay on top of both plan developments.
So don't get scared by that. So we're going to have to pick.
That was not my intent.
Pick one for that plan, knowing you haven't adopted the plan.
Right.
Now that hopefully a fairly reasonable version is what's directed by council, so it doesn't flip-flop 180 degrees 9 months later when you adopt the plan. I doubt that's going to happen. So we just have to do that to stay on schedule with federal requirements.
Right. And one thing that is a little bit odd is that the DOT does have what they call a control total. They do set their requirements because it is a federal highway plan. So they will take what we're doing and make some cutoff that maybe we don't exactly agree with, but they do that for every MPO in the state for consistency purposes.
And remember, the MPO boundaries are much larger than the city, so those numbers are just different. And it takes in Gilbert, takes in a couple miles around the city. So,
yeah, but no, I say it's actually a very, very, very positive thing. I don't think we've had a land use plan.
yeah, so
and
the
long-range plan work together.
the last plan required the planning director to get his crystal ball out and tell the traffic engineers how everything was going to work for 20 years when you had a 20-year-old land use plan that we weren't following. So this will be better no matter what.
One thing on transportation. Is it possible we could invite Cyride to come to the meeting coming up in January? Cyride is not going to look the same. When we go to any one of these directions, they don't have the capacity to morph and grow if we're going to have the same level of service. So I think it'd be helpful for us to make sure Cyride plays such an important role in transportation. I want to make sure they're at the table and process this because it's going to be different.
Can I offer a little different option? So we would visit with Cyride. They've been involved in the past, but I think it'd be a more of a staff technical working meeting so we can work through detailed issues with them rather than just maybe come to the council and for 2 minutes just tell you general. So would that be an alternative for us to visit with them and then report that out?
But we just need to receive that, because that model is going to be different.
So
And we would definitely do that, but I can accelerate that meeting
Sure.
before January 14th, if that's what you want to hear.
I think if we could have that information prior, by Friday the 10th, that would give us time to think about it over the weekend if we have other questions and follow up for the
Yep,
14th
I get you.
meeting. That
Yep.
makes sense?
So I'll organize a meeting for our staff, just kind of talk through it with
Right.
them. They haven't probably looked at this since earlier in the summer when they were part of a broader technical team that was looking at the scenario. So I'll definitely clue them in about where we are now.
Anything else? Well,
All right. Thank you. Thank you, RDG and HDR.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
They put a lot
Good
together in the
work.
last 2
This is
weeks,
really,
catching up to tonight.
this helps us a lot.
And Damien.
I don't need to be that.
Thanks, Damien.
Will John Jr. feel threatened by your offering to input on the sanitary sewer, or Tracy?
I don't think, I've never seen John feel threatened.
You had enough disclaimer in there that. All right. Council, we got one communication. We had a letter, or we had something from Herb Klaus that was sent to us relative to some kind of and the reason I bring it up is that there's a timeline on a grant application. Did you all see that?
I forwarded that to you, Steve, right? That Catherine Knight sent me to about emissions, something,
Today?
This is
a grant. It was like,
Recharger grant.
oh, okay, it was a different, yeah.
Okay. All right. So if people if they're not aware of it, I think it's sometime in February, right? Is what the.
Yeah, the application deadline is in February, on February 17th, and it's for fast DC chargers funded out of the Volkswagen settlement, specifically for communities along I-35 or I-80. So it might be a good opportunity for us.
Let's do
Yeah.
it.
So
So random.
Can we move for a memo on that?
What's that?
I'm happy to move for a memo on that.
I haven't seen the letter.
Um,
Second,
You want to second that?
second,
You
yeah.
send-
Sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, we can forward it to you. I think it's just, if you have questions, you can talk about it. So I think it's just worth, if there is some, if we can submit a grant request, we didn't want to wait until January 14th and only give you a month to think about it. Everyone understand the motion, the memo? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Thanks.
All right. Council comments. Devin, we'll go around table this way.
Yeah, so I have two things. Semester's over, tests are done, feels nice, like a big weight. And I appreciate all of you this semester helping me communicate with students and hopefully represent them right. And then another thank you, my last thing. Chris, this is your last meeting with us, and I just wanted to say thank you so much. I've only known you for this semester, but I know you've done well in serving your community. So until next time, thank you so much.
Thank you, Devin.
So lots of thank yous tonight. And I want to appreciate Chris in terms of not just the substantive way he's helped us do the lifting for the last 6 years, but also the manner in which Chris is very even keeled, and really appreciate the thoughtful approach you brought to everything. You'll be missed. So thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, I second all of that. I appreciated serving with you, and I've learned a lot from you. And thank you for this service to the community.
Thank you, Bronwyn.
So I'll add to the thanks fest.
Looks like a Dean Martin roast.
Yeah, thanks for your service, Chris, and I found your input particularly helpful in understanding some of the more technical aspects that go along with codes and small business ownership in Ames. And I hope that you will continue to send us input. I think you have our email, so you can give us your perspective. But I enjoyed serving with you, and I wish you well.
Thank you, Gloria. I've got nothing. I said everything. I said everything I needed to say last Tuesday. But I guess I'll thank everybody again.
I would extend my thanks as well. It's been great over these past 2 years.
Thank you, David.
So I obviously agree with what everyone said. Tim, Gloria, Chris, and I are sort of like the original four. You know, we all came in together and obviously campaigned together and learned a lot of things together. So it's we're breaking up the gang here, but thank you.
Thank you, Amber.
Well, I don't have a lot to add, except for the fact that one thing that I really enjoyed is this council has really worked hard together as a team. And we get to know each other. We spend a lot of time together. We kind of become like family. And it's really hard to have a family member, depart. But I do thank you for your perspective and your objectivity. It's been very, very helpful. And you'll certainly, be missed, but we'll be adding somebody else that I'm sure will be a good contributor as well too. But when I go to national and local or national and state, I hear about other councils, Iowa League of Cities, National League of Cities. And I just can't, and I express this to all council members, we are so spoiled in Ames, how well we work together, because you hear about people who are rogue. You hear about people who are disruptive. You hear about people who are not team players. And it's a testament, to all 7 of you, and count myself in that. But just, it's just, I think Ames has been very fortunate and will continue to be fortunate, because it takes that to move things forward. And when there's not, I tell people, no, they don't always disagree with everybody, but that's fine. But the point is they're civil, they respect one another's opinions, and they really want what's best for the community. And yeah, we have 4-2 votes at times. Once in a while, we have a 3-3 vote, and then it's like, look over to me. But the point is that you contributed to that, and thank you for your service. And I know you're not quite done yet. You got a salary board meeting tomorrow.
I think officially I'm still mayor pro tem through the end of.
That's correct. You are.
So,
you are. And I want to say
please don't let anything happen to you.
I just want to say thanks for filling it, because Chris has, there's a lot of requests for participation. There's times where I wasn't able to make it, and Chris filled in. He said, absolutely, I'll help out. So that's been a great benefit. So anyway, and to everyone who's watching, those in the audience, we wish you happy holidays. That's hard to believe it's already the end of the year. I was waiting for Tim to say go Cyclones. We hope we come back with a nice big trophy from the bowl game. But we have a great community, and we just got a lot of positive things going on in the future. And next year will be great too. So anyway, and I want to say RDG and HDR, our staff, this is what we were looking for. This is what we really needed. And I think because it was very helpful for me to have a couple of days to kind of digest it ahead of time. I think that a lot of us, I think everyone looked at it ahead of time, but that helped us be more efficient and have questions that were more on point, as well too. And man, there's a lot of variance there, and we're looking forward to getting public input and reaching out to people on the 7th and having a robust conversation, so we can give you some good direction on the 14th. So
Sounds good.
Anyway. All right, entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
We are adjourned for the